This is the unrestricted free agent.
Welcome into the program. Glad you're here. And I just pulled my microphone completely off the table.
I think South Carolina's catching Clemson. I really do.
Defense, I'm going to tell you right now, they're nasty. They're going to be nasty all year.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
Who knows what's real and what's not even anymore?
When you see black and white and you're calling it purple, I got problems with that.
And LT, I told you, it's all about the tear talk.
How about that for a start? Maybe the strangest time of the college football season from the Gamecock perspective is here. Welcome in. Hope your Tuesday is off to a good start. Charlotte this week, South Carolina State next week, coming off a just flat-out embarrassing performance in multiple ways against number one ranked Georgia. That's where we sit. That's a bit of a bummer intro, isn't it? Hey, what it is, right? I mean, Corey Miller was just in the intro there. Corey was hot yesterday. You guys did not get the Pastor of Pain, or even if you didn't get the full near hour appearance yesterday, go back and check that thing out. Now, you can do it now. That's the brilliance of a digital show, right? You can watch what I'm doing right now live. You can watch it later. You probably wouldn't check that show yesterday. I mean, he was hot multiple ways. Multiple ways. See you guys coming in hot this morning as well. Anthony, up first. Good morning, UFA. CC in as well. Roger, sunny as always. Craig, good to see you too. Hello, back at you. Happy Tuesday to Kirby. Kirby, thanks for weighing in as well. How you guys feeling? An interesting spot if you are a Gamecock fan and multiple ways. And yesterday's news. The South Carolina State game this afternoon. I probably didn't put any great notes. I don't think anybody was pulling for that necessarily. And then the discussion, which we will not spend the bulk of our time. We barely even talked about it yesterday. But it's class of 2022 in a lot of ways. And thanks for the heads up on the sound there, Roger. To play a little bit from Shane Beamer. We'll see if we can't get that cleared up, and then we'll get into what was largely the conversation yesterday around Beamer and the Gamecock program and why I think we are above that in multiple ways on the program, on this show.
You sense any give up in the locker room?
Hell no. What kind of questions that, Phil? We're 1-2. We're 1-2. We got a bunch of fighters in that room, and give up. That's not a part of this football program. Get out of here, man. With that, no.
How about that? So that's the soundbite that got a bunch of play nationally, right? And it was there's a comedian on social media. You guys have probably seen him that does a parody of a coach film session that led that off yesterday. If you didn't see it, you might want to check it out just to know how the program is being presented in at least one form that's pretty popular online. I thought it was all right. Not the best one that I've heard or seen, but a pretty good one. It's pretty funny. Pretty inventive. Craig, I don't have a problem with the question. I'm like most people. I think I'm like most level-headed people out there. Corey Miller talked about it yesterday. No problem with the question. No problem with the answer. That is to be expected, I think, after a game like that. And appreciate the feedback there. Roger, good to see you. Ken's in on the show. Most of what was talked about yesterday was optics. And the Washington Post picked it up about Shane Beamer's apology for the Title IX recognition. I'm not going to call it ceremony. It was just the recognition on the field where the University of South Carolina invited all 250 plus, I think, female athletes onto the field in between the first and second quarters to be recognized, the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Then it took all of them a lot longer than it should have to get on and off the field. You only got 3 minutes there in the break. Get on, get off. And Shane Beamer was told by officials, and he mentioned this in his apology, that, hey, as soon as we get back from commercial, your team needs to be on the ball, ready to go. They were, and the play could not continue because of the gathering in the end zone and getting people on and off the field. And Shane Beamer's on the ESPN broadcast, all ticked off at these people. Hey, get off the field. As a female soccer player that says, hey, we were asked to be there. And then all of a sudden we're out there for 15 seconds and then we're getting yelled at to get off the field. Oh, and then that gets a bunch of steam. Beamer's apology, it gets picked up by the Washington Post, and haters are going to hate. That's my point here with this, right? Don't need to talk about it too much. Don't fall for it. I mean, Nick Saban's famous for his rat poison speech, right? For players, not to fall for any early praise. To me, this is rat poison for us, for humanity, is a story like this, where if you don't really know what's going on and you read it briefly, it's really easy to wag your finger and say, oh, I can't believe that male coach did that to those poor girls. How dare he? What a bad guy. So anybody who didn't know anything about Shane Beamer or barely knew about him, maybe knew that he's the son of Frank Beamer and read that Washington Post headline maybe, or scanned the first 3 sentences, like I'll admit I do a lot of times in articles. And if they are of a certain mindset, and a lot of people are like that, or maybe social media makes it seem like a lot of people are like this, that they'll read something, not know a lot about it, but they will form a strong opinion and let everyone know about it. Well, that's what happened yesterday, by and large. Reason why we're not going to talk about it very much today is we shouldn't pay attention to those people. Those people have always existed. I knew those people growing up. Don't you remember those people in your class in elementary and middle school? They were the ones who the teachers ignored, who the class ignored. And you're just like, oh, Rob again. Oh, Rob, that's just Rob. And they were really easy to ignore because you couldn't read their thoughts. Their thought wasn't right behind like the teacher's post or the principal's message. It was just that was the dummy in the class saying another dumb thing. No need to pay attention to that. But unfortunately, there is no social media dummy font. And what I have learned through, what are we now? Not 15 years in. We're definitely a decade. We're definitely 10 years into the social media age, right? I'm trying to think when I know when I did my first radio show, I didn't even have Twitter. And that ended, I think, in like 2008. So not even 15 years into this thing, at least in my mind. But what I have figured out is that there are some people out there who are just waiting to express their opinion. And there's also another sect of people who are waiting for those people to do that so they can yell at them and tell them how dumb their opinion is and the whole thing. And it's so ridiculous. It is just lowest common denominator in a lot of ways. It's disappointing. And DC, obviously, it did not go well, but you don't know when they should have done it. You don't. I mean, they recognize the national champions at halftime. You do it before the game, and you get criticized for making those athletes be there early and then not giving them the full exposure of a crowd being in the stadium, right? So this is another part of it, right? That we automatically become game day operations experts when we see one example of a situation that doesn't turn out optimally. Clearly, that was a bad look. I'm not trying to make excuses or anything else. Absolutely a bad look. It should not have been done how it was done. No doubt about it. But I don't know how game day operations work, man. I know it is a cluster. I know there are a lot of people who work really, really hard. And we talked about noon game and what that means for fans. Well, I guess they're operations folks who are, it's their job to be there early, stay late, and to make sure every single thing goes smoothly. That job wasn't done well, especially in this situation. I think Shane Beamer reacted how most coaches would reacted, or especially maybe like an emotional coach like he is would react. And this is also part of our just it's easy to become naive, I think, as a fan, right? You get sold a bunch of stuff, right? If you watch the hype videos or social media videos only, and you come to one extreme opinion or another, and you think, man, Shane Beamer is a really, really nice guy, great guy, all the time, never gets upset. Right? Well, that's ridiculous. And we saw the example of that in the post-game press conference. We saw it a year ago after the Georgia game as well, where it's really easy to get agitated as a head coach when you get your butt beat, as Steve Spurrier would say. And Shane Beamer's not afraid to show that. And in a situation where media and coaches are at direct odds, which you are after a coach gets his butt beat and media is asking questions, there are going to be some moments like you saw. When there's a problem on the field that could lead to a delay of game penalty, it could have happened, and your team is already down 14-0 to the number one team in the country headed into the second quarter. You're on the verge of getting embarrassed on the field. Yeah, you're going to be on edge. So that's what we saw. And then the fallout from that is just the typical fallout, right? Especially from a Washington Post article. Anyone who wants to virtue signal and say, oh, women's sports, that women keep getting the short end of the stick and the whole thing. No one that has any sort of clue about the University of South Carolina actually can get that impression. It's been the opposite, right? Clemson fans have been making fun of Gamecock fans for being a women's basketball school now. For how many years? For a while. Dawn Staley and the women's basketball program, by far the most successful sports program the University of South Carolina has in 2022. And it ain't close. And it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. So that's where you have to just let the noise be the noise, right? Let those things go. Understand that those people are going to be those people. Haters are going to hate. So I wanted to address that, get it out of the way. Let's move on, because giving it any more attention is exactly what those people want. And I would much rather pay attention and focus on the things that are really easy or non-clickbaity, right? The beautiful things that happen in this world. And a lot of times beauty comes out of tragedy. And unfortunately, Clemson standout defensive lineman Brian Breeze, they lost his 15-year-old daughter, Ella, in the last week or so. And I don't think you can follow college football in the state of South Carolina, maybe just follow the news in the state of South Carolina and not have heard that. So Breezy did not play over the weekend, was back in Maryland with his family. He returned to campus yesterday. We'll be going back for the ceremony to honor the life of his sister, either today, tomorrow. I'm not sure when it is. But Louisiana Tech head coach Sonny Cumbie wore a shirt that said Ella Strong during the game, I believe, and had every single Louisiana Tech player write a note to Brian Breeze. That is a beautiful gesture. And that's what sports is about, right? So I feel like all of us as human beings have a choice today and moving forward. We had the choice yesterday. If you have social media, right, you always have some control on your output. You always have complete control on your output. right? What you put out in the world. So if you choose to get on there and be all bitter and say, oh, how dare you, and I'm going to defend Shane Beamer, and he doesn't deserve that, and I understand where you're coming from, I guess, that you feel like you're being loyal to your coach, and I don't quite see how that's the best approach. I'm always ignore the things that shouldn't even merit response and focus on the things that do. It's a common complaint in 2022 that the media doesn't focus enough on good news. Oh, I focus on bad news. Well, that is just a very simple result of following the money and human nature, right? When we feel threatened, we have to know more information to avoid the threat, right? Back in our brainstem somewhere, we know that. And so it's much more likely that we're going to explore something like that. We're going to click on it now than we feel the need to do that for something that's just all positive. So I feel myself having to fight that urge and seek out something like this. Obviously, it's not a beautiful thing that Brian Breezy lost his sister, but it's the response to me that brings out that shows, that gives me encouragement, that is clear evidence that we as people are much more likely to react to each other, to engage with each other on a human level in a positive way, as opposed to that just ridiculous mess with the Shane Beamer and the Title IX stuff. Yeah, Craig, such a terrible situation. Feel terrible for that family. Good for you for sending him a message on Instagram. It's when sports really gets put in its perspective, right? And Gamecock football social media account. I know I don't know how many, countless for me on social media, Gamecock fans sending their thoughts and well wishes to one of Clemson's best players and their family at this time. And that's what we should all be about. So I feel like you have a choice there, as we sit here today, to put your energy into one direction or the other. I choose this one, to see the world in that way, and to be encouraged, to be hopeful, to understand that, yeah, we're very capable of that, and that is as much, if not more, the default human condition than wagging a finger and saying, I can't believe you did that, and how dare you. It's, oh man, that's awful. And what can we do to help? Let's write you a letter to let you know that you're not alone in this time. So Sonny Cumbian and Louisiana Tech, good for those guys. Again, every Louisiana Tech player writing a letter to Brian Breezy in support of him dealing with an absolute tragic situation, losing his 15-year-old sister. So those were the really heavy stories, I guess not just yesterday, but recently here in South Carolina sports. Getting back to more of what we speak about on a day-to-day basis. We didn't get to it yesterday because it was, man, when it's 48-7 in a game that you got sold out, that you're featured on national television right out of College game day against the defending champs, the defending national champs, number 1 ranked Georgia. It's a border battle that traditionally South Carolina has played Georgia better than a lot of other Georgia opponents. So we didn't talk about Herm Edwards getting fired at Arizona State at all yesterday. We talked a lot about Marcus Satterfield, Gamecock offense, Gamecock defensive struggles, and 5 starters out and the whole thing. Dramatic swig of water. But this Herm Edwards thing at Arizona State, I think, certainly notable from the Gamecock perspective because Arizona State, I think, in a lot of ways, on par with South Carolina football from a program perspective through the years, historical context. I know they played for a national championship, in the Jake Plummer years, first BCS. And outside of that, I'd say the numbers are pretty similar. Obviously not in the SEC, so if you want to thump the SEC card and say, nope, Arizona State doesn't compare, okay. But, man, this is a situation where, and I thought it was really interesting, Corey, one of the things that Corey said yesterday, Corey Miller, and again, I don't know if this is, I put 2 segments up on the YouTube channel, our show segments there on the Unrestricted Free Agent channel. One of them was when his phone overheated. He was really getting after it. It was mostly heart. He was talking about being challenged and how that certainly applies to more than football. But the other one was really the offensive struggles and Marcus Satterfield specifically not using Jaheim Bell like he needs to be used, and Corey being very adamant that Jaheim Bell's a better football player than Brock Bowers. It's a difficult argument to make coming out of that Georgia game. But I think he's just talking about kind of pro potential, everything he brings to the table, and how frustrating that is to see Jaheim Bell catch 1 ball. Josh Van, Juice Wells, 0. Throw that frustration in there. And then Brock Bowers just kind of dominate the football game. But one of the main things that Corey said was that it seems to him like Marcus Satterfield has an NFL mindset, and it doesn't work in college. NFL mindset is our players, some of the best in the world, and they should be able to execute the game plan because our players are a lot like their players. So if we have just a slightly better game plan, then it's going to work. Man, you saw not necessarily a close game last night. Buffalo just absolutely blowing out Tennessee, by the way. I love the Monday Night Football doubleheader. Philadelphia, no problems winning either against Minnesota. Sorry to our Minnesota fans on the. I know we got a big Vikings fan. Hope you're not listening now or you're over it already. But my point is, Herm Edwards is an NFL guy. He wasn't in college football since 1989 when he was hired to be the head coach at Arizona State, and he was in his 60s. And you get what you get. College football has changed a bunch. Herm Edwards is a really likable guy, right? In general, I think. He played to win the game. I mean, imagine what kind of characters can you say you play to win the game? Is that 6 words? You can say 6 words and you automatically, I mean, Allen Iverson is probably the most famous in sports talking about practice, right? Playoffs, you got 1 word with Jim Mora. You got 6 words with Herm Edwards. Just win, baby, Al Davis, 3 words. There are very few guys that get 1 phrase and you know exactly who we're all talking about. Herm Edwards is one of those guys. I think appropriately, though, it happened as he was the head coach of the Jets. Great NFL player, NFL guy. Didn't work out at Arizona State, and now it's a mess, right? You get beat by, what was it, Eastern Michigan just beat them? Eastern Washington? I don't know who beat them. Because Arizona State's irrelevant. They've been irrelevant now for a while. 26-20, I think, the final record. And NCAA investigation about ignoring COVID rules, basically. Bringing people on campus and visual evidence and assistant coaches getting thrown under the bus. Well, finally, Herm Edwards had to shoulder the blame. And you've probably seen the social media video of him after the game on the field, coming over to the AD, used to be his agent. And they talked for a few seconds, and it seemed pretty clear that that's where they let him know where this thing's all done. We got to move on. But the point here is fit, in my mind. The point here is fit. I think Herm Edwards is, by and large, a good football coach. He didn't turn out to be a good football coach at Arizona State. Chris, morning to you, sir, on the Facebook live stream. Yeah, and I think he really was. That's when they let him know. And people were like that. Like, when is the right time? To me, I got no problem. You got to understand the relationships, too. Long-time relationship with former agent who is the AD who hired him, telling him the news. Like, stop. Don't let him dangle, man, in that thing. I guess you wait until after the post-game press conference or something. You do it in an office away from people. You think that's better, but I had no problem with it. Like, he obviously handled it fine. I'm sure it wasn't a massive surprise, but certainly notable college football news, and shows you how the game at the highest level is played, the stakes that are involved. Right? Scott Frost lose to Georgia Southern. See ya. Herm Edwards, bye-bye on the field. It's why we will have, I think, a responsible, mature, we will continue to have those discussions specifically about the coach that is that right now, kind of embodies that hot seat mentality for the Gamecocks, and it's Marcus Satterfield, the offensive coordinator. But it's not some sort of witch hunt or personal or anything else, man. It is based off of this. The stats. I put it out yesterday, the tweet from the Sports Talk Media Network, who did my work for me here, put it all together. The national rankings out of 131, where the Gamecocks sit through 3 games, 1 quarter of the season. Total offense, 100. Scoring offense, 100. Total defense, 113. Scoring defense, 112. Now, those defensive numbers were better last year. They were, I think, in the 50s range, maybe the 40s range. Maybe not quite that high, maybe even the 60s. No, but these offensive numbers were somewhere 90 to 110 last year. Rushing offense, 124. Rushing defense, 125. Third down. Turnover margin, 5th worst in the country. Saw yesterday as well, another stat that can't make you feel great as a Gamecock fan. Arkansas, worst pass defense in the country, 131st. I think Charlotte's is pretty close there if you're looking for something to feel good about moving forward. Yeah, in the video, Herm didn't look surprised, Chris says. Roger says there have been very few successful in both college and the NFL. Pete Carroll comes to mind. Yes, he's one of the very few. Dennis Erickson to some degree. Bill Walsh. Jim Harbaugh. Although Michigan fans a couple of years ago would disagree with that. They are who we thought they were. Denny Green. Well done, Craig. Yeah, Chris, but this is kind of the conundrum. I guess not the conundrum. This is why I started the show with saying kind of an odd spot for the Gamecock fan base the next couple of weeks, because Charlotte's defense is not good. He says that they're ranked last, no excuses this weekend. Therefore, you don't get a whole lot of credit. I mean, the bar, the floor for this week's game, Corey Miller was talking about scoring 40. Yeah, Georgia State just scored 40, right? Like, I don't know what can make you feel good coming out of this game. That's kind of the tough spot Gamecock football is in from that standpoint. Even if you roll up 700 yards of total offense, you say, yeah, well, that was against Charlotte. That's good. That's great and all. But, right? And then South Carolina State the next week as well. Charlotte won last week, so you might say, hey, we've been hearing that Georgia State's a good team. Charlotte must be a good team. They're not. I respect Will Healy how he's built the program. They got a win against Duke a couple of years ago. It was fantastic, and never thought I would ever say that in my life. I'm from Greensboro, so a bunch of my high school buddies went to Charlotte. This was before they had football, to show you how old I am. So the fact that they even have a football program at all is still hard for me to wrap my brain around, my old brain. But they lost by 30 to Florida Atlantic to start the season. They lost by 17 at home to William and Mary. They lost by a bunch to Maryland. Let's see if I can do that math. 35. So a big win for him, don't get me wrong, and brutal loss for Sean Elliott and Georgia State. And for those of you who have a life, let's put it that way, and maybe don't nerd it up like me and look at way too much college football, then I think it might be easy. You see Georgia State come in against Shane Beamer and say, man, Sean Elliott should have got that job and Will Muschamp shouldn't have. And Sean Elliott is a good college football coach, but Georgia State has kind of been what just happened to them, right? Able to win some games they shouldn't win, Tennessee. And then they do lose games that they should not lose relatively consistently. Unfortunately for Sean Elliott, I think it's why he hasn't necessarily ascended to being a major college potential head coach, so he hasn't quite gotten to the level where we saw Billy Napier get to, where we've seen impressively Jamie Chadwell get to over at Coastal Carolina, just because of some losses that have held Georgia State back from being kind of the national underdog darling, like Louisiana became, that Coastal Carolina became. Just haven't gotten there. And it's easy to overlook, right? Georgia State and Charlotte, not the first game that you looked at, I'm guessing, from a score standpoint on Sunday mornings or on Saturdays. 60,000 in the stands, Craig says, Saturday. Have they already lost fans? Well, if Gamecock football has already lost fans after a 1-2 start, I don't know if you wanted those fans. I'm not looking for blowouts, just consistency, Chris says. And Craig says he hopes not. I'm guessing it will be somewhere in that range, right? The next 2 days or the next 2 weeks, I think you got a better chance to have a better crowd this Saturday, Craig, than you do at noon against South Carolina State on October 1st. Just game time. And I would imagine Charlotte fans will travel to some degree right down the road and enjoy the SEC atmosphere, which is much different than what they got at Turner Field last week in Atlanta. But it's a weird spot, man. So I mentioned 3 games in. The first quarter is over. So my question to you today, from the Gamecock football perspective, is how has this team through the first quarter of the 2022 season matched up to what you thought it would be? You put out those numbers. I put up those numbers of national rankings. I think both sides of the football are pretty similar. I think both of them are not underachieving a lot from what I thought. I'm just going to speak for me here. I expected both sides of the ball to be a little bit better. Didn't expect 2 touchdowns on blocked punts. I think Gamecock special team still ranks number 1 in the country right now by whatever metric you can come up with there. So special teams better than I expected. Both the offense and defense underachieving in my mind. The defense, if I got what I expected at a 5 out of 10, right? Or, kind of a mid-level line, and you can go much higher or much lower. I've got the defense slightly lower, I would say like at a 4, especially considering the significant injuries that they've had to deal with. And then I've got the offense at about a 2 and bordering on a 1. It has been again, outside of the fourth quarter, largely at Arkansas, do have to give them credit for the second quarter as well. So there were kind of two pretty good quarters at Arkansas, but the Arkansas pass defense especially isn't good. They were dealing with injuries of their own. They almost got beat by Missouri State the next week. Got to take that into account. So the offense has been much worse than I expected it to be. The defense has been slightly worse than I expected it to be through 3 games. How about you guys? Ken says, if the offense continues to struggle through the next 2 weeks, would you be on the fire Satterfield train? If you can't move the football against Charlotte and South Carolina State, you got to do something on offense as an SEC school. And I guess, Ken's, we have to define what is continue to struggle, right? What does that mean exactly? Because the offense is not going to struggle like we've seen it struggle through 3 games against Charlotte and South Carolina State. It's just not. To me, this is more a matter of kind of evaluating on a sliding scale, right? What do you have to see through the next couple of weeks? And I don't know, no one knows how Shane Beamer feels about a mid-season coaching change. I got no idea, and this is where I am baffled by people who are very adamant and just always call for a change and never think about, hey, well, is that going to be better? Change for change's sake. Talked about a lot during the Muschamp era. That's not necessarily a good thing. Like, Arkansas wanted to change out Brett Bielema, so they brought in Chad Morris. Whew. I have no idea. And if you know this, if you are a football nerd and know Freddie Kitchens' offensive system and how he would apply it to the University of South Carolina based off of his time in the NFL, then God bless you. Your football knowledge is supreme. I got no idea how Freddie Kitchens would run an offense right now. That's the easy default answer, right? You got a former NFL head coach on staff as an analyst, offensive background. You say, all right, guy who's been calling the plays, you're out. Let's get a new guy in there. He's definitely going to make it better. Is he? There is no proven track record of Freddie Kitchens in college football that I know of running an SEC offense to a high level. So I don't know even if Shane Beamer would be open to making an in-season change, especially a year plus in, a year and a half-ish in, right? I do think that you don't deserve to be a coordinator in the SEC when your group is one of the worst in the country. I think that's pretty obvious. So I don't know, Kens. My honest answer to that question is, yeah, if they continue to struggle against South Carolina State and Charlotte, absolutely. You got to make them. You got to make a change. But I think that question is flawed to some degree, if that makes any sense. Craig says, not at all what I thought it would be through 1 quarter of the season. We've gone scoreless in the first quarter in 8 of 16 games with Marcus Satterfield calling plays. That's unacceptable. Okay, so I guess the question is, Greg, did you expect a completely different offense? Did you expect this season to be not what last season was? Because my expectation wasn't that high for the Gamecock offense. It was to be better than last year, but if you had to give me national rankings, I would have said like top 50 is probably the ceiling from what I saw last year, the personnel coming back, especially with the concerns on the offensive line. Like, I didn't expect this offensive line to be one of the better units in the SEC. I thought that was a ridiculous expectation for a group who was second to worst last year, maybe worst. That just didn't happen. So all of a sudden, you just don't get. I understand offensive line communication, working together as one is very important. And year two, you should see some progression in an offensive system, but you just don't snap your fingers and get it typically as an offensive line group in the SEC. You got to have dudes. And when you have the same guys coming back who struggled in the year before, I think it's only reasonable that you expect a certain amount of improvement and not a completely different identity to form. DC says, I thought we'd be 3-2 going to Kentucky, but didn't expect us to be this bad. Well, what is this bad, DC? Because Georgia is really, really good. Arkansas seems pretty good. Maybe to play this bad. But that's the thing. There is no... I can't pull a full identity out of these first three games because there's 9 left. There's so much more left, and I do give Arkansas and Georgia a lot of credit for some of these struggles. I can understand first game, new quarterback, not being able to click on all cylinders against Georgia State. But I think that's the most concerning game out of the 3. Would you guys agree? The game Carolina won by 21 is more concerning to me than losing to then number 16, now number 10, Arkansas on the road, and getting blown out by the national champs and the number 1 ranked team in the country at home. To me, you can flush those. You can accept those if you looked really good against the Sun Belt team and you came out game 1 and established an identity. You pushed that team around. You showed that you were an SEC offensive and defensive line and controlled things. So I guess that, from that standpoint, I can understand DC saying didn't expect us to be this bad. Roger, I guess, says he's feeling about the same as me. Biggest disappointment, like a lot of folks, the offense overall, rushing and passing both. To me, it's the run game, and it ain't even close. Not even close. Marshawn Lloyd, maybe it's because he's so likable. His story is tremendous, right? Going 2 hours to DeMatha in high school from the state of Delaware, where they get overlooked all the time. You come down south, you get a SportsCenter top number 1 play in high school in your senior year by you jumping over a guy, and there's video of you doing it before. I think maybe as a freshman a few years beforehand. Like it is the beginning of a legend. And I'm not saying Marshawn Lloyd's going to be a legendary player. I'm just saying that those are how legends get written, I should probably say, right? And then to hear him, great story. What was that? Mike Yuva put that out there. I forget, somebody talked to him. Maybe it was Mike Gillespie, I think, who talked to him at media day and said, yeah, the day before preseason camp started, I'm a big manifestation guy. I took my knee brace and threw it in the back of my closet, done with it, moving forward, getting over the ACL injury, a year removed from that, was it practice number 3 in his true freshman year where it was torn. Now, year number 3 in the program, strong as he's ever been, feeling like his old self. And then, what are the numbers? Let's put them up. 3-game rushing stats. Let's get Roger out of here. No offense, Roger. Marshawn Lloyd has 3 games played. I'm just going across the 27 carries in 3 games. That's an average of 9 by my math. He's averaging 25 yards rushing per game. 2.8 per carry. A long of 13. Now, I think he does have some. Let's be fair here. Let's go to the passing stats. He does have 10 catches for 107 yards. So he's averaging nearly 36 yards receiving. So a lot of times passes are an extension of the run game. 36 plus 25, you get what? 61 yards per game. So it's not completely embarrassing when you put those together, right? But the run stats, not good. Carolina, what sticks out to me on this rushing deal, 2.3 yards per carry. 2.3. And yeah, we heard it last week from both Shane Beamer and Marcus Satterfield, and I would be shocked if you hear them point this out again this week, talking about how, well, third and shorts and fourth and shorts you're around the goal line, that's going to skew the stats. When we had it on first down, we averaged 5 yards. First or second down, we averaged 5 yards a carry. I didn't buy it then. Certainly ain't buying it now. And I think they're smart enough to know that you don't keep pushing something like that. We've seen that before. Will Muschamp keeps bringing up, well, we did win the most games ever in the first 3 years of any coach here, coaching staff. Yeah. Nobody wants to hear that. And I had never heard any coach ever explain away a struggling facet of an offense in that way. And I don't anticipate we'll hear that again. But to me, that's been the biggest surprise. Because I mentioned the offensive line. I didn't expect a massive difference, but I did expect, and I think Mike Bobo showed us, the 1 year under Mike Bobo, is that you don't have to have one of the best offensive lines in the SEC to have a relatively consistent run game. You just got to kind of commit to it. You got to commit that that's your identity. Mike Bobo brought that identity with him. Carolina became that with Kevin Harris, going for more than 1,000 yards in that 10-game SEC-only season. They weren't a good offense, don't get me wrong, but they did have an identity. They were going to be a run-first, pin and pull was their scheme, right? And it did work to a certain degree. They did find some success with that. They at least knew kind of who they were going into a game. We're 16 games in, and this offense doesn't have a clue who they are 1 week to the next, at least from the outside looking in. And I think that they are clearly a quarterback-led, want to spread you out and get the ball outside and think that's the best way to attack you. But when Shane Beamer came in at that Georgia State postgame press conference and said they got whipped on the perimeter, you can't be that team. I get it. Jaheim Bell's a good player, solid NFL prospect, but you got to have NFL receivers too, consistently. And Juice Wells did lead the SEC in receiving after 2 games, but then Georgia took him away. Josh Vann taken away. If you're an NFL type guy, if you have several especially, well, if they take one away, then the other one should kill you, like Juice Wells did against Arkansas. Unfortunately, it appears that that's more because Arkansas is not very good defending the pass than it is about the Gamecocks being good enough to kind of impose their will. A premier back like Lloyd, and he just has no chance back there. Chris, that was from Roger. Chris says, how many teams run pro-style offenses? I would think the spread's still the most widely used scheme throughout the league, and it is. And I don't know how many other programs in the SEC describe their offenses as pro-style. I get it. Maybe that was the reason, one of the main reasons that Spencer Rattler came to Carolina, but I think that's kind of an outdated notion, isn't it? Tua Tagovailoa just threw for 6 touchdowns over the weekend. I mean, he's been a punchline in the NFL because of his inability to kind of adjust to the pro game, but obviously he can still play it. Let's see what DC's got to say. Is Georgia really that good? I don't think they're as good as we made them look Saturday. They could have scored 80 and held us to 0. I bet a few other teams in the East will score 20 to 30 points on Georgia. I think the fair answer is no, they're not that good, but they certainly played like it, DC. And I don't know, when you factor in, it wasn't just against Carolina, but they did it to Oregon too. And Oregon just beat a pretty good BYU team. And Bo Nix, while having some flaws, to me is a pretty good college football quarterback. He certainly looked like it against BYU, did not look like it against Georgia. So I think, in a kind of a weird way, you kind of hope they are from the Gamecock perspective, DC. Craig, stop trying to give it to 5 different guys out of the backfield. Feed Marshawn. Let him get lathered up, especially the next 2 weeks. What running back will want to come here? Better hope Lloyd doesn't get fed up and leave. Don't think he will, but it better change. I don't see offensive struggles like we've seen continuing the next 2 weeks for sure. And then you got a top 10 team right now in Kentucky, right? And it is certainly the challenge that Arkansas was. I think they're right there. And Kentucky's defense, I think, has been better against South Carolina in the last few years than certainly Gamecock fans would like, but it just hadn't been a good matchup. Kens, don't be that guy. I wish we had Clemson's schedule. Life would be easier. Yes, ACC schedules are easier than SEC schedules. This year, though, it's not massively different. You're going to tell me that Texas A&M just seems overrated is where I'm going with that. I get it. Liberty had a really good chance to beat Wake Forest, so Wake's probably not as good as we thought they might be going into the year, maybe that they've been in the last couple of years. Georgia Tech just drubbed by Ole Miss in Atlanta, so they're not worth a dang again, it looks like. Yeah, it's still a more difficult schedule, no doubt, but you ever heard of winning programs complaining about their schedule? Never heard of that. And Steven says, speaking of schedules, today's SEC portion of the schedule comes out at 7 o'clock tonight. Just something to keep an eye on. Especially if you're a long-term planner. Will be interesting to see how the SEC schedule sets up for Carolina, because this year, no favors. At Arkansas, week 2. Georgia coming into your place week 3. Whew. At least you do get this 2 weeks afterwards to kind of reset. To me, what these next 2 weeks are massively important for the 2022 schedule, or 2022 season, I should say. This is when Carolina football should really form its identity with Spencer Rattler as its quarterback. This is when you got to have some offensive success. You got to get rhythm, pace, production in the next couple of weeks. Even if you do it, you're doing it knowing that larger challenges are to come. So I feel like we will find out in this 2 weeks. Well, maybe this Saturday is the best way to put it, especially after being embarrassed last week. You do find out what the program is made of, where the offensive identity is. It's a massive week in that way. Never thought I would say that about the Charlotte game, but just with the way the schedule has worked out, again, I'll say what I said going into game number 1. If you can't run it against Georgia State, you ain't going to be able to run it against Georgia. And if you can't have a bunch of offensive success against Charlotte and South Carolina State, that is, then how can you have it in the next 6 SEC games? It's been an odd year in college football that way, right? Duke 3-0. I think I saw a stat, actually. For the first time ever, North Carolina State, Wake, and maybe one more in the state of Duke started the season 2-0. First time ever since the schools have been playing football. And now you got Duke at 3-0. You got Vandy at 3-1. You got some things that you didn't see happening. But from an SEC perspective, I don't think we've seen a ton of surprises. Appalachian State being Texas A&M, bit of a surprise, but we saw Texas A&M lose 4 games last year, a team that beat Alabama. So it wasn't like they had already ascended to that level of consistency that we've seen from the major programs. What other nobody was surprised that Penn State beat Auburn. Maybe the fact that they crushed Auburn and the SEC short about charging Penn State for Auburn's murder. Pretty funny. Oh yeah, Kansas being undefeated, massively impressive. Is that Lance Leopold out there, former Buffalo coach, I think, doing that? I mean, if you want to point to one example and really complain about your big time school not being creative enough or good enough on offense, I think Kansas is exactly where you look and say, hey, look, how are they doing that there with those guys? And we can't do X, Y, and Z at our place. But I think Kansas is the exception. And Arizona State, Nebraska, Notre Dame, go down the list. To me, that's what the first quarter of college football has been this year. It has been those upsets and a lot of disappointment, I think, from some big-time fan bases. Tremendous to see that Sunbelt Saturday from 10 days ago, I guess it was, and to see some programs getting pushed, to see Florida getting pushed against South Florida, Liberty almost knocking off Wake Forest over the weekend. Just another reminder of how great college football is. So, tons of college football to discuss, as always, as you would expect on September 20th. But the Gamecock discussion can get depressing pretty quick, I think. So that's why we touched on some other things today. Tuesday, typically a good time to do that, right? You get all the post-game stuff out on a Monday, kind of wrap it up on a Tuesday in a few hours. Maybe not even quite that long. I guess it's about 2 hours from now. Gamecock players will be speaking to the media, weekly press availability, and then Shane Beamer takes to the podium after that. It will be much less about Charlotte, I think, and much more about the Gamecocks and their struggles and a plan, a vision of moving forward, addressing those, getting right. I think Shane said that specifically after the game against Georgia. We'll get right and move forward. Well, what does that mean, right? How is that going to happen? What is this team going to look like in the next 2 weeks to get right and to get back where it needs to be to have any kind of confidence heading into the large portion of the SEC schedule? So first quarter evaluation, you got to put a letter grade on it. I think only fair to go D for South Carolina. I don't know how you would go any other letter grade than that. Maybe C minus. C if you want to be really generous, I guess. But to me, it's a D. And not that they're 1 and 2, because I expected that. That the one wasn't overly impressive outside of the special teams performance, and actually more concerning than the other two. But one of those two was completely uncompetitive at home. Georgia's really good. Completely uncompetitive is unacceptable. And that's what we see now through the first quarter of 2022 Gamecock football. Quick note, Braves get the 19th win from Kyle Wright this season last night against the Washington Nationals, who continue to be awful. The Mets also winning, so the Mets clinch a playoff spot. The Braves are a game behind, so I'm guessing they can clinch a playoff spot today. They won like their 9th game in a row at home, Atlanta did. 37th home run for Austin Riley, continuing to click right, to me, exactly where you want to be at this time of the year. You end up winning the East, fantastic. You're going to get a bye in the playoffs, the way that thing's set up this year. Weird way, right? First time ever, I think, 6 in the playoffs. The top 2 get byes, 3 wild cards, and then the division winner with the worst record out of the division winners will play in that. Will play a best of 3 series. Then you move on to a best of 5 division series. Then it's the best of 7 championship series. Then the World Series. I had to look that up the other day just to make sure that I understood exactly what Major League Baseball is doing this year. Braves in a great spot. Max says, I think we have the top 3 hardest schedule in the country based on which games are away and home as well. Roger, great question. Is Rick Sanford going to be on later? I see him right now. We'll get him on in just a second as we get close to hour number 2. First, needed to tell you about one of the sponsors on the program, Freedom Primary Care, who I trust to care for my family. I recommend that you give them a shout at 803-627-2447 if you want to learn more about a naturally minded primary care, putting you in charge of your health. That is especially important to me and my family. The fact that Freedom Primary Care, they're not going to intimidate, bully, pressure you into any kind of health decision. Their line, which I respect and identify with the most, they're responsible to you, not responsible for you. So you want to go the more naturally minded route of care, they'll certainly walk you right down that and lead the way. If you want to go the more conservative, traditional route, they can do that as well. It is your choice. It is Freedom Primary Care, 803-627-2447 up in Fort Mill right now. They do have telemedicine options as well, and all the 21st century options and freedoms maybe you can go with, or different routes of care, different ways of approaching care that you would expect. That's Freedom Primary Care. Please support those who support the show. Appreciate you guys supporting the show as always on the live chat where Roger called for Rick Sanford right on cue, and Rick's on the move as always. You got a walk going out there today, Rick?
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to stay in shape, Tim. That Gamecocks may need me.
I think that first round draft pick back in the day might make you ineligible from the NFL standpoint.
Yeah.
Man, what did you make of what you saw on Saturday, Rick?
Well, I tell you what I saw. I saw that South Carolina's got a long way to go.
Yeah, that's only fair, man. I think it's only fair. What I guess what might be the most concerning part that you saw there as we continue to get Rick. Now we got you back. I think we had a little digital glitch there, Rick. What do you think is the most concerning thing to you that you saw in the 48-7 loss? He popped right back out on us. Oh, now he's back in there. Gotcha, Rick. You got me.
There you go. Okay. Yep.
So most concerning thing you saw from Saturday?
Well, where would you like me to start? I mean, there's a lot of concern. I think you have to look at the offensive line, defensive line. Both of those are a real concern, if you ask me. The injuries, yes. I mean, but that's part of football, Tim. I mean, I understand South Carolina had 5 starters out, and that's all. You can make an excuse for that if you want, and I get that. I mean, maybe but the other guys that play behind them are on scholarship too, and they should know how to tackle people. And I tell you what, there were some opportunities out there during that football game where it looked like to me South Carolina's defenders were running the other way with Georgia's players. It just, obviously they didn't tackle well. And, when you look at a game like that and look down the road, you're not going to beat anybody if you can't block people and tackle people. So, I'd be worried about the 49ers coming in here this week if I was Shane Beamer right now, and South Carolina State, to be honest with you. I just, like I said, I mean, I understand the injury, and that type of thing, but, those guys play behind their own scholarship.
Appreciate the patience with the little digital glitch there for Rick. Maybe he's pumping up the RPMs, the miles per hour there on the walk. Just lost you for a second, Rick. But yeah, I know what you're saying there, man. Backups are on scholarship too. To me, depth is tested in a major way. No one expected South Carolina's depth to be better than Georgia, but I think Gamecock fans did expect to be more competitive than what they saw out there. I think it's the lack of competing, and I talked about it going in, man. That's how I was going to evaluate the season, right? Close the gap between your program and the best programs in the country. To me, the gap got wider on Saturday, which is the cause for the greatest concern.
Well, I agree with you, Tim, and that to me would be my biggest, takeaway from the ball game. I thought that when you look at the competition level, sure, I didn't expect South Carolina to win the football game, but I did expect them to cover the 24 points, quite honestly. Well, I didn't realize that Georgia was going to cover the 24 by halftime. It was brutal. I mean, it was really brutal, and I kind of felt for Spencer Rattler back there. Not that he was great. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he played a great football game either. But look, I mean, when you don't have time and you're trying to do things throwing the football that, without time, you just can't do it. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So, I think we.
Oh, Rick was just going to give us the answers there, and the cell phone didn't let him as he continues to get a little exercise in this morning. There you go. You just cut out.
Yeah.
I think you're going to give us the answers there moving forward, or
Well,
I'm not sure where you're coming.
Well, I'm not sure what the answers are. I think you have to, as a coach, I think you have to go in there and go in and just tell these guys and say, look, let's be honest, we got our ass handed to us. I mean, let's not sugar it and say, are we that bad, or how are we going to improve? And all you can do is, get back to work on something like that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you there from the player standpoint, what do you do? Corey Miller mentioned some defeats back in his Carolina career. Florida State won, a Clemson won. Rick, as a player, can you just flush that one? Is it just that simple?
I don't think you do as a player, Tim. I think you have to, as a player. I mean, that's one of those that I would bank in my memory bank, quite honestly. I think you have to learn from that. I mean, if you just flush it, you're just saying, okay, well, play too well, just get them next time. I think you need to learn from it. I'll tell you, I learned a heck of a lot more game I ever did winning.
Sorry, just going in and out on us there. Rick saying that he was learning more from losses than wins. That's where we got you there, Rick. I got you learning more from losses than wins.
Yes. I mean, I think you do. You learn more from losing than you do from winning. So I think that you don't bank it. I mean, you don't just wash it away. I think you have to learn something from that, get back to work this week, and really, the real season starts here the next couple of weeks, Tim. Because if they can get back to 3-2, you're back into the heat of the SEC coming up, and then we'll see how the season pans out.
Okay, so what now? What needs to happen? Obviously, you got to win the next 2 weeks, right? But beyond that, Rick, what does South Carolina need to establish, need to produce on the field to get some confidence back going into that 6-game SEC slate that you're talking about?
Well, I think you got to get some consistency out of your offensive line and your defensive line. I don't think they have either right now. I don't think their front seven is not very good right now on defense. And, the back four aren't great, so I think you have to look at that, and you got to come up with some kind of, work ethic to where you're going to say, look, I'm not going to stand for this. I think that, Coach Beamer's doing the best he can, but, a coach can only do so much for you. I think, he'll put you in position to make plays, but, when it's time to make a tackle, you got to make a tackle. That's just that simple. So, I don't know what the answer is, Tim, but I do know that South Carolina better put it together here in the next few weeks, because it's not gonna be pretty down the road if they don't.
No doubt about it, Rick. I wonder if you could zoom out a little bit. First quarter of the season, what you expected versus what you've seen. How do you kind of separate those two?
Well, I expected more consistency out of this team. I mean, quite honestly, I thought you're returning.
The consistent cell phone signal is what I was expecting from Rick in this thing, just to be that's smart, Alec. He's still on the move there, and we'll try to get him back here in a second. I'm interested in hearing there. I'm guessing he was going with offensive line, I think, coming with guys coming back. Let's see, Rick, we left off with consistency is what you were looking for? Were you going offensive line route? Is that where you're starting that one?
Yeah, both offense and defense, I think, Tim. And I'm quite honestly through as many games as South Carolina sitting at 1-2 right now. To me, it's disappointing. People say, well, they had a tough schedule to start with. They played Arkansas, and then they played Georgia. Well, you'd have liked to have seen them be a little bit more competitive against those teams than they were. They fell behind at Arkansas and had trouble, and Georgia they fell behind and had trouble. So you'd think that they would be more consistent at this point than they have been on both the offense and defense. And I think that's been the biggest key that I've noticed, that there's just not a whole lot of consistency up front.
How much blame do you put on the players
what does
for
that come
Rick?
down to?
Right, exactly. What does it come down to?
I
More
put it on the
players?
players. Sure, I put it on. Yeah, I put it on the players for the most part. Players play, Tim. I mean, you'll hear people talk about Satterfield and his offense. Well, I mean, you could probably blame some of that on that, I guess, if you want to. But it's your player. Your job is to get out there and do what they tell you to do, basically. Okay. And I just, there were times I thought against Georgia, and I'm not talking about when they got down by 40 points. I'm talking about there were times I kind of questioned the effort. And, it's just, I think Shane Beamer did too. I mean, he looked out there and said, look, we put them in position to tackle at times, and they just didn't get it done. There was a lot of plays that could have been made out there. And, a coach can only do so much. He can only get you in the position. You got to be, as a player, you got to be the one that's going to have to make the play.
Is a missed tackle, is that the most frustrating thing for you to watch as a former defensive player?
It's one of them, yeah, because, if you get that guy on the ground, you live to play another down, and in doing so, you're helping your team out. It just doesn't make sense to me, Tim, if you've got a guy who's played the amount of football that these kids do, and I know they get scholarships on offense too, but as a defensive player, you got to take some pride in yourself and use your techniques that you've learned all throughout your football career to break down on people in the open field and tackle them. Put your arms around them. You can't wail your body at somebody. These running backs and receivers are too good now. They just jump over them. So you can't be ducking your head and diving down at people's feet and all that. I don't know. I just was very, very disappointed in the tackling the other day by South Carolina and the physicalness. Where's the physicalness? I mean, they looked like they were getting pushed around all day long. And I know Georgia had a big, massive front line, just like Arkansas did. Okay, I get that. But you know what? You still got to play them. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you got to get up under their pads, and you got to get, blocking and tackling. If you can't block and tackle people, you can't win games, Tim. That's just that simple. Football is nothing more than blocking and tackling. It's a very simple game that people try to make hard. It's not that hard, but you've got to do, when you learn a technique on how to break down in the open field and put your arms around people, that's what you have to do. And I didn't see a whole lot of that on Saturday.
I'm with you on that, Rick. That's why I just was talking about my evaluation of the first quarter of the season, those 3 games. The most concerning one to me was the first one, when I didn't see South Carolina push Georgia State around. Just heard last week from Marcus Satterfield how good Georgia State was. Then Charlotte goes and beats them, a team that got blown out by Florida Atlantic, couldn't beat William and Mary, blown out by Maryland. That ain't a good sign. So, again, it comes to, I don't know how much credit Carolina can get in the next couple of weeks, but they really got to get it going. And ultimately, Rick, I feel like a lot of what we've heard Shane Beamer preaching, and he got a bunch of credit for it, and he deserves it. Changing the culture, setting the tone, creating an identity. Don't you feel like that is challenged tremendously now after the performance we just saw?
I do. I do think it is challenged. I think when you get your tail handed to you 48-7, and I understand that was the number 1 team in the country. We talked about that going in last week. But that to me was a measuring stick. And South Carolina, measurable right now, is not real good up against the top teams in the country. I made a prediction early on because I thought this team was going to be a lot better than they are, and that South Carolina was closing the gap on Clemson and State and all. And maybe they will by the end of the season. but not what we've seen so far. They haven't closed the gap, and I don't see, I know we're looking down the road a little bit here, but I don't see any close game up there now. I mean, if South Carolina can't get it together offensively and defensively and start, doing what they're taught to do during the week, because to me, that was extremely disappointing. I thought that you had the opportunity to, show the country how far your program had come. And I understand South Carolina not on par talent-wise with Georgia, but one thing that I didn't understand was the competitiveness against Georgia. I mean, you're the only team in the country last week that had an opportunity to beat the number one team in the country. And you go in there and lay an egg like that, it just, it just kind of, I was just kind of baffled when I left out of there.
Man, I can hear it in your voice, see it on your face, and I heard a similar sentiment from Corey Miller yesterday. I think it's from a former player standpoint. To see an uncompetitive game like you just saw is especially frustrating because it's a pride thing for you guys, right? I mean, that one, it's tough.
Well, it's not.
Thought we had him there for a second. We'll get him back. It looks like it might be a loop, and we might be getting him on get him for most of the loop, but not quite all of the loop. We'll get the Rick Sanford breakdown of the exercise routine here in just a second as Rick is on the move there. Good for him getting the exercise. Got to get the steps in. Got to get the steps in for sure, and a nice day to do it. No doubt about it. So as opposed to those of us on the outside who never really played football at this level, I was saying, Rick, that I feel like maybe those of you who did take it a little bit more personally when it's an uncompetitive game like that, a bit kind of personally embarrassing to see your former school compete like that or not compete.
Well, I think it is embarrassing. It should be embarrassing to those players over there is who it should be. It didn't embarrass me. I mean, I'm not playing anymore, but I do think that, you better find some toughness and get back to work this week because you really got pushed around. Really, they've gotten pushed around. Let's be honest, Tim, 3 weeks. Hadn't they been pushed around 3 weeks now? Even though they won the opener, I thought they got pushed around a little bit against Georgia State at times. So, to me, it all comes back to doing what you're taught to do, knowing what you're supposed to do, and then going out and performing it. I mean, it doesn't make sense to go out there and practice all week and sweat and do all that, and then you get an opportunity to show what you've done and go out there and play like that. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Have you it sounds like you might have a little bit recalibrated or reset your expectation for this season at large based off of the first quarter of the schedule? Oh, it set it up so dramatically as well. And then we got a dramatic pause. Cell phone can't handle the unrestricted free agent drama. Sorry, Rick. Did get okay. The first part of the answer. Go ahead.
I said they should be like to evaluate after the next couple of weeks. You've got teams coming in that you should be able to handle. And let's see how they handle them. Let's see what they do with that. If they struggle with these teams, do you have any hope they're not going to struggle in the SEC? I don't. I mean, so.
Yeah, I think that's a fair place to be, no doubt about it. And then, so Rick, if you go that part of it, if they struggle, I think you do. You have to say, well, this program is not where we thought it might have gotten to. Maybe that bowl game completely skewed things. But what about on the other side? We can't just be negative Nellies here. What if Carolina does play well in the next couple of games? Does that help a team just immediately get its confidence back, or is it still you want to make sure that they have that memory of the Georgia game, that the memory of not winning at Arkansas going into the SEC slate? All right, so the technical difficulties here. Well, gotcha, Rick. Missed the first part of that answer. Let's get you here.
No, I was saying that I think you're going to play a team that you should dominate this weekend, and then you're going to play a team that has got somewhat good athletes on the other side of the football that could give South Carolina trouble. with the way this season's gone with a lot of these games, it's kind of bizarre how these smaller college teams are playing with a lot of these bigger schools. So, I mean, it just means they're going to have to come to play next week and come to play the following week and perform to expectations, for goodness sakes. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. I'm like you, Tim. I don't know that this program's where it needs to be yet. I don't expect it to be, anywhere in the top 20 teams in the country right now, but I do expect a level of competitiveness that I haven't seen very much. That South Carolina, I don't know whether they just need.
Chris weighing in as the technical difficulty there. I think we'll wrap it up with Rick. We'll give you, Rick, how about we go a couple of final thoughts here, glitching in and out. We'll wrap it up right here. I missed the last part of that answer there. Don't know exactly. I think you're saying that you don't know exactly where the program is or the expectation should be.
Well, I think that, we'll find out more after this next couple of weeks. I think you need to dominate these teams. I think these two teams coming in, this should not be hard, should not be difficult, and you better get yourself ready to play in the SEC, because after that, I think Kentucky and Texas A&M loom. Then you got Missouri, you got Tennessee, and you always got Clemson up there lurking in the upstate. So, it's a tough schedule. Yes, it's a tough schedule, but you know what? Tough times don't last, but tough people do. And that's the way I'd be teaching my kids right now. And I think that right now that South Carolina just needs to, buckle their chin strap and start playing a little bit tougher up front on both the offense and the defense.
Good stuff, Rick. Appreciate you weighing in on what you saw over the weekend, man. Get those steps in. Sorry for the technical glitches, though. We'll try to work those out next time. It's Rick Sanford, first ever NFL first-round draft pick from the University of South Carolina. Kind enough to share some time with us each and every week here, and doing it typically on a Tuesday. York says, thanks, Rick. I hate when fans say they are embarrassed. Be disappointed. Saying embarrassed speaks to your ego. See, I don't know about that, York. I understand what he's saying. I almost feel like it's the other way around. It's like, hey, man, that wasn't me. That's you. I don't have to worry about it. I think a lot of fans internalize it and really feel like they're part of the program. And I think now you can do that more than ever with name, image, and likeness, and the opportunity to have your money directly go to players. I think fans are a part of programs more now than they've ever been. So I've been thinking about this too, especially how about Texas A&M deserves a bunch of credit. And I don't know how they did it, man. I don't know how you lose to Appalachian State and then you get 107,000 people back at Kyle Field the next week for the Miami game. Now, I guess maybe you say, well, it was a non-conference game and you still got a bunch of stuff in front of you, and you beat Alabama last year, so you can beat anybody, clearly. Maybe you say that's college football. It happens, and it's an early season deal, and we're switching quarterbacks, and we're going to be a different offense, which they weren't. But with all the money involved there, and I connected them. I tried to put out on Saturday. I'm seeing what I thought was an overreaction to it was embarrassing. It was whatever adjective you want to throw out there, right? And if you don't want to feel like you're personally embarrassed, I guess I understand what you're saying, York. But it was uncompetitive against Georgia. I think embarrassingly so for South Carolina on the field. So to see the reaction of that, I felt like maybe a lot of Carolina fans really had talked themselves into competing with Georgia, giving Kirby Smart and company a run for their money. I didn't see that game going like that. I think, what did I say, 37-17, something like that, 38-17, I thought the final score would be. So, like Rick, I thought they would cover, not by a whole lot, but 24.5 was a lot of points, especially at home. And Carolina had just scored some points against Arkansas, had made that comeback from down 21-3 and got right back in the game. I thought they would compete much better. I thought they would continue to show some program progress in that direction, and they did the opposite. And that, I think, as a fan, you totally have my permission to feel embarrassed, especially if you're connected, you're paying for tickets, you're contributing to the Gamecock Club, you're part of a collective. I mean, if you're directly connected to a player and you have them representing you, imagine like, whew, I can't imagine that. That's a serious investment. So kudos to Texas A&M for bouncing back as a fan base, I guess is where I'm trying to come from here, knowing all the money that's involved out there, knowing the massively high expectation for Jimbo Fisher, losing to Appalachian State at home. Whew. So bouncing back from that to some degree was pretty impressive, I thought. Also, did you guys see Appalachian State almost made it like 4-for-4, whatever it was? I think Georgia Southern lost. Somebody pointed that out yesterday on the live chat. The week after beating Nebraska, Marshall lost the week after beating Notre Dame. It is really difficult to be consistently good in college football week after week. You bought some Rattler gear, BW says, so that's the investment there. Okay, personally attached. Got it. Chris, I think this is very fair. I think Chris says on the Facebook live stream, if we struggle the next 2 weeks, then that 7-5, 6-6 that we were hoping for is out the window. See, I don't think anybody was hoping for 6-6, maybe 7-5, but I think you hope for 8-4. You expected 6-6 at the very least, and a lot of people expecting 7-5 after a 6-6 year number one. But I tried to, in the interest of fairness and perspective in our preseason conversations, when we would talk about expectations and what we presumed would happen in 2022, what we were predicting, that you just can't go off of the good. You got to factor in some of the bad as well to fill out, to have a full picture of year number one. And a 3-point win at East Carolina, a 9-point win at home against Troy, part of the first season under Shane Beamer. The Clemson blowout loss. Tennessee blowout loss. Barely beating Vanderbilt at home. All part of that season, not just running up and down against North Carolina in the bowl game. So after the first quarter of the season, and we're going first quarter evaluations here again, I will say disappointing. I think if I had to use one word to describe the first quarter of the season from the Gamecock perspective, disappointing. I think that is very fair. I think, first of all, you're disappointed in the record in that you didn't steal a game on the road at Arkansas, where, what did it end up? The line ended up being single digits, right? 8.5. I think South Carolina was like a 19-point underdog to Florida last year, something crazy like that. You weren't supposed to win the game, but it's totally within your right to be disappointed that you didn't. Totally fair and realistic, logical. But the real disappointment, the reason why I don't say it's just being 1-2, I expected Carolina to be 1-2 after 3 games this season. The disappointing part is that you didn't look impressive in game number 1. You haven't established an identity on offense, and then you got absolutely embarrassed by your SEC East rival. They are the defending national champs. They are the number 1 team in the country. I understand all that. You did have 5 guys out on defense who were starters. Yep. But like Shane Beamer said after, it's like, I don't want to hear all that. We had enough good players to be a lot better than that. And they weren't. It does set up, I think, an instant reality check for Gamecock fans. And so maybe in that way, this 2022 schedule has done the Gamecocks some favors. That anybody who is out there being a keyboard cowboy on the message boards or on social media or wherever, saying, poor Takeo Spikes, right? You see him? He's a rookie SEC network guy this year at his first SEC media days, getting a little caught up in the the preseason hype and fanfare, and Shane Beamer's a likable guy. And on that day, he says, I'm predicting the Gamecocks to win that game on September 17th. Whew. He was a great linebacker. Played with emotion, passion. Like Corey Miller said, maybe wearing the emotions on the sleeve a little too much. Yeah, I'm sure he'll learn from that. But that's what this first quarter of the season has done for anyone from the Carolina camp, I feel like, that was really, really encouraged by that bowl game and really, really thought Spencer Rattler would immediately turn into the Heisman Trophy front runner that he once was by coming to Carolina, and that Marshawn Lloyd was going to be the absolute real deal that he wasn't anywhere close to in his one full season on the field. And it was just getting through a knee injury thing, and that offensive line would gel and come together and rise to the top of the SEC and the country, really. None of that's happened. So instant reality check. Unfortunately, I think, if you're pulling for the Gamecocks to take that next step. DC says, I was embarrassed. I don't know if that's my ego or not, but one thing's for sure, I will continue to support Carolina no matter how embarrassing it gets. I think that's a really important distinction, and it's what makes DC a good fan, and it's the absolute line between being a good fan and not. That last part. I will continue to support Carolina no matter how embarrassing it gets. I think that's how Gamecock fans got a great national reputation and the 21-game losing streak still showing up to Williams-Brice Stadium. I think Steve Spurrier has kind of had the opposite effect on the fan base in a lot of ways, raising the expectation, expecting different type of behavior from Gamecock fans. I think he expected championship level fans or fans to act like it was a championship level program before he delivered that. He didn't deliver that. I get it. I get why he did. He brought that pedigree with him. He had earned those championships before, but he never did at South Carolina. And I think that Gamecock fans showed me that they were that they are a really, really good college football fan base with how they handled the Muschamp era by and large, by being excited about a 6-6 regular season in year number one, being thrilled, I think, by and large, in that second season going 9-4, beating Michigan in an Outback Bowl, expecting the program then to have created a foundation to only build off of from there. And then when they didn't, it went the other way. The unwavering loyalty wavered, I think, only when it should have. It wavered accordingly. To the coach, I'm talking about. Not to the program, I'm talking about to the coach. Chris, interesting phrase there. It's not a respectful 1-2. I think you might mean respectable. Right? I agree. It's not a respectable 1-2. That loss at Arkansas was respectable. What we just saw against Georgia was not. And the win against Georgia State didn't earn anyone outside of Pete Lembo or maybe DJ Smith, Rashad Amos, Traven Kenyon, who blocked the punts. Sorry, did I say DQ Smith? If I said DJ Smith, my fault. Any of those guys who block punts and return them for touchdowns, it didn't earn much respect. And Chris adds, a true fans support their team win or lose, pretty wins and ugly losses. Roger says, I remember what Corey said that Carolina needed to do in his preview of each upcoming game this year, and USC's done the opposite in each game. Disappointing, main word, through 3 games. Don't know how you can come up with anything other than that. To me, the entire first quarter of the season, you don't put as embarrassing. It was that last game that was the embarrassing one. Disappointing to lose the Arkansas game, and I think a disappointing performance overall in game number 1. You win by 21 points. I understand why Shane Beamer would say we're not going to apologize for winning and we're going to celebrate the whole thing. And yet, I think you can still analyze and evaluate and say, no, this was not how it should have been. And I'm sure they did that internally as well. But the question is now, what do you do moving forward? What do you do this week to make sure that what happened in game number 1 against Georgia State, a team that your opponent just beat in their place, doesn't happen in game number 4? Because I don't know. I heard what Rick said, and being a former player, I get it, right? Coaches can only do so much. It's players who play. But I think specifically from an offensive coordinator standpoint. Now, when you're a defensive coordinator, you see guys in position to make tackles. They don't make tackles. I get not blaming coaching. And I think Clayton White has done enough in 16 games to prove he's a pretty dang good defensive coordinator. And I think the opposite is true on the offensive side of the ball. That unless you're just seeing players wide open dropping passes, or you're seeing a quarterback that has open guys not put the ball on him, and you say, well, these guys just aren't playing well today, I think an offensive coordinator does deserve a lot of blame for not scheming up, for not coming up with a scheme to have success on offense, to move the football consistently. And I think it's very fair through 16 games to say that Marcus Satterfield is not a good offensive coordinator from an SEC perspective. Troy, resident Clemson fan, weighing in for the first time today. Good morning to you, Troy. 1 and 2, where most thought South Carolina would be, but I know y'all expected the Georgia game to be more competitive. I also picked South Carolina to cover. So don't give the y'all. You can say we. Thank you for mentioning that. Is that magnanimous? Is that the word we use there? Very big of you, Troy, to slide that in there, that you also picked South Carolina to cover. Well, maybe that's the difference, right? You picked them to cover, but not necessarily. Well, be more competitive would be almost anything, but not to be competitive necessarily. I don't think losing by 21 is competitive. That first game that Carolina did do that against Georgia State, kind of the exception, right? With 2 block punts for touchdowns. Chris, isn't that what Kitchens is there for, as an offensive consultant? Yeah, and that's part of it too. The magic bullet that people looking for blood want out there. That offensive analyst Freddie Kitchens steps in as the offensive coordinator, and then that'll magically fix everything. Well, yeah, he's an analyst on the staff right now. He's part of the whole deal. 38-16, 1 point different than me, Troy. I think I had it 38-17. Is what you thought the Georgia game would be. I think if that had happened, especially with the game being, 14-10, even 21-10 at some point, then we would be having a different conversation. And I would evaluate the entire first quarter of the season differently. I wouldn't say disappointing. I would say about what I expected. I'd say right on par with where the program, the trajectory of the program moving forward. Roger going deep here, giving us the eagle eye view perspective of being a Carolina fan since the late 60s and 70s, as long as he can remember. I'll be loyal no matter what. Lord knows I've had plenty of chances to give up on him over the years. I will not, though. Good for you, Troy, because you're a good fan. Roger. Troy's a good fan, too, I think, for Clemson, except Clemson basketball. Terrible Clemson basketball fan. I mean that with love, Troy. And Roger, there are so many more like you. I feel like there are so many more Gamecock fans like Roger than there are bad fans. And you say, well, the student section emptied out real quick on Saturday. Students they're going to be students, right? You get the good, and you get what you got on Saturday. Chris says, I was off by 3 with Georgia's score, predicted 45, but way off with ours. 20 off. You had 27 points. You thought Carolina would score against a Georgia team that gave up 3 in their first couple of games, Oregon being one of them. Okay. So I only think it's fair to say that we don't quite know what this Gamecock football team is going to be. I don't know if the next 2 weeks is really going to tell us much. It will show, I think, the effort we see Saturday will show us early whether or not this team has what Shane Beamer is trying to get it to have. What I think Shane convinced me of, maybe that's kind of his superpower here, that he convinced me that this thing had almost turned 180 degrees through year number 1. That the oversimplification of, no, these guys aren't playing for themselves and just trying to get to the league. They're playing for their brother and they love each other and all of that stuff that we hear, the culture changing, and this is part of our why. We're doing it for the fans, and you got some dramatic music underneath, and you got a head coach who understands and knows how to appeal to nearly everyone, right? To the Gamecock fan base, which the last coach either just had no clue how to do, could not do, or didn't give a crap about doing it. And this is 180 degrees different. Shane is. And what we saw in the bowl game was a team that played 180 degrees different than the team we saw at the end of the Will Muschamp era. But that was not the full story of year number 1. It was easy to remember that last, to have that recency bias, to oversimplify it that way. And now, Chris, you say all 3 of those from Muschamp. He couldn't do it, didn't want to do it. And I don't even remember the other one. Roger says Troy likes Clemson basketball, just not Brad Brownell. Yeah, just because you like a sport or you like your team doesn't mean you're a good fan. And Chris, from a guy who said Thanksgiving is a meal. Yeah. Just one of the memorable quotes that stick your face in a fan Will Muschamp had in his tenure at Carolina. But what we've seen, I think, is it's not a good representation. I'm trying to figure out how to word this exactly right. And I don't know, a fair representation. We haven't seen the year number 1 under Shane Beamer represented in the first 3 games because we haven't seen the highs, right? We haven't seen a win that Carolina shouldn't have gotten or that they weren't expected to get. We haven't seen an upset like when you see Florida, Auburn, and North Carolina last year. That's 3 of the 7 wins, man, against established programs that you were underdogs against, and you pulled those out. So that raised the expectation level for sure. I think we've seen so far the meh part of year number 1 from Shane Beamer. You might take some confidence knowing that Carolina did pull out those games in year number 1. They're certainly capable of doing that. Shane Beamer himself is capable of coaching a team to wins like that. Next 2 weeks won't be that, right? But you can get performances that are near top of the charts, right? And I think that can help you feel a lot better about this program headed into the 6-game SEC slate in several weeks. And I think that's what's necessary. You don't just need to beat Charlotte. You beat Charlotte, but you only do it by you don't cover the spread, which is at 21, I think I heard. Then you don't feel good. I mean, maybe if you win by 20 and you were up by 30 and they scored the last 10 points of the game or something, maybe that would do it. But you gotta get rolling. You gotta show something that you haven't shown before in 2022. Spencer Rattler has to look a lot more like the guy that was at Oklahoma or the guy in the fourth quarter against Arkansas than he has the rest of the time he's been wearing a Carolina jersey. Troy, no one feels bad for you, man. No one on this show, anyway. I love Clemson in all sports. Brownells had about 30 years, or at least it seems that long, and Clemson is 16-16 in basketball every year. Nobody feels bad. We will. How you feeling about Wake Forest this week? To me, you got to feel really good after what Liberty just did to them over the weekend. Chris, 30 to 40 points offensively the next 2 weeks in each game. Yeah, I would say definitely. Even 30, I'd say is a little low. I would say 38-ish plus. 40 burgers, what Corey Miller called for yesterday. Offensively, I think is a good point there too. If you score that many, but you get a pick six, you get a special team score. South Carolina fans are savvy enough to recognize that. You can feel good about a win, but that doesn't mean you're going to feel good about an offense. And I don't know. I shouldn't say. This is familiar territory in a lot of ways, but it's unfamiliar in that in the Will Muschamp era, Muschamp got a lot of blame for offensive struggles. And he deserves them. He's the head coach. He brought that reputation with him, right? But Shane Beamer is not Will Muschamp. He's not Steve Spurrier. He came in as a first-year guy who had coached on both sides of the ball. The main reputation really being connected to Beamer ball and special teams and like more of a well-rounded, I think, approach as opposed to being one side of the ball or the other. And as likable as he is, I think it's been very easy for a lot of Gamecock fans to scapegoat his offensive coordinator, especially the way that it went down with Beamer originally hiring Mike Bobo, and Bobo after a couple of days saying, peace out, I'm going to Auburn. And then you bring in an assistant offensive line coach from the Carolina Panthers, who most college football fans hadn't heard of. And that's where we are now. Troy says you're worried about the pass defense of Clemson against Wake, and I think you should be. And that's what it's going to take, a monumental game from Sam Hartman for Wake Forest to knock Clemson off, I think. But it's definitely possible. Jason weighing in for the first time this morning. Good morning, sir. Need to see at least 40 the next couple of weeks. And if there are defensive or special team scores, then it needs to be pushing 50. Unfortunately, that's where we are. I can't disagree with you. And maybe you would maybe you could accept slightly lower than that if you see a massive total yardage stat and you see some struggles in the red zone. You say, oh, well, we can clean that up. We ran for 300. We threw for 300. You got 600 total yards, but you only scored 38 points on offense. I think you'd get over that. You got to see just improvement, man. Significant improvement. And to me, it's not comparing what you just saw from Carolina, because the really easy comparison, just the scheduling gods did this for us, right? Charlotte just beat Georgia State by a point. So South Carolina needs to be a lot better against Charlotte than they were against Georgia State to feel like you're seeing progress. Very simple to me. It's an easy evaluation tool. You got to run the ball a lot better. And maybe Charlotte plays a different defense than Georgia State does that will somehow be a better matchup for the Gamecocks. I don't know, because it could have been a much worse matchup in game number one. Whatever they were doing, and whatever, it didn't work out well, obviously, against Charlotte for Georgia State. So that's kind of how I'm seeing things headed into these next 2 weeks, which is just, again, a weird spot for Gamecock fans to be in a lot of ways. But that's the beauty of college football, man. The beauty. And again, want to go back. The haters are going to hate out there. don't waste any energy, time, effort. That Title IX stuff that went down in the Washington Post and the whole thing. They don't care about South Carolina football. Washington Post cares about clicks. People who are going to comment off of that just care about getting their opinion out there. Just looking for conflict. Let it go. I much prefer, again, and will repeat it, what fills my spirit in a good way is the story that happened at Clemson over the weekend. Brian Breezy wasn't there. He was back home with his family as they were mourning the loss of his 15-year-old sister, Ella. And every single Louisiana Tech football player wrote him a letter. Sonny Cumbie, good for you, man. That, to me, that's leadership in its best form. Has nothing to do with football. It does have everything to do with being a leader of men, which it just so happens typically those are the best football coaches. I don't think it's a coincidence. And so many Gamecock fans I saw on social media reaching out, extending sympathies, thoughts, and prayers to a rival who most likely, it seems like at this point, will dominate South Carolina and have a lot of success, and is one of the biggest reasons why Clemson is being thought of as highly as they are this year, dealing with just an unspeakable tragedy of a 15-year-old life cut short. But it's an example of life being beautiful as opposed to just the haters hating, man. So it's up to all of us. We get to decide which way we want to focus our energy and attention. Roger, like Craig said before, I'd love to see the Gamecocks find their running game. Boy, sure couldn't have run on another Sun Belt team, and Georgia State sure could not run in that one. Shaking my head and baffling how they've been beat up front. I agree. Craig says Lloyd goes for more than 125 this week, needs to feel good about it. Bull weighing in for the first time today. I believe the only reason Georgia State lost to Charlotte is due to them being beat up, kind of like South Carolina, due to playing North Carolina, South Carolina and North Carolina. Yeah, Georgia State had already played South Carolina and North Carolina, beat up, and then Charlotte was able to pull out the win. Makes sense, but I don't know if that makes South Carolina fans feel much better. But I know a big win will to a small degree. 2 big wins will, I think, help Gamecock fans just exhale and feel like whatever they were thinking year number 2 under Shane Beamer was going to be might still be possible. If you don't get 2 big wins in a row, I don't think you can feel that. I think you're being a little reckless feeling that. Let's say it that way. So appreciate the conversation today, man. That noon game time stinks for the South Carolina State game, but that one not overly surprising, unfortunately, from the Gamecock fan perspective. I mean, that's when you really got to appreciate the new air-conditioned areas at Williams-Brice, don't you? Maybe it'll be a little cooler for that, but I don't think anybody is expecting that. Should have Perry Orth in later this week. We'll see if we can get him on tomorrow. I really found it fascinating when the former Gamecock quarterback joined us last week and talked. He explained to me, or maybe crystallized to me, what Marcus Satterfield did not, talking about how he understands they need to get more creative, but they're making it like the most simple offense in America, simplify. And he seemed really frustrated with how he had to simplify it, I think. But how Steve Spurrier was able to keep things pretty simple for his players and yet confuse the opposition by just running the same play, but out of different formations, running some motion just to confuse the defense, kind of window dressing, I think is what they call it again. Thumbs down from Chris on the noon kickoff. Yeah, I mean, that's just a general, right? I feel like the SEC, the ESPN executives, they know, like, all right, who are we going to tick off this week? Nobody wants noon games, college football. Nobody. Do you? I don't think anybody likes it. Maybe maybe those morning people out there. If you're a morning person, you can hear it in my voice, right? Morning people. That's my Newman. And that's also from doing a morning show for a while, just being, got to work through that. Got to get over that at some point. But the SC State, I can't even say it today, game being set for noon. First quarter evaluation. Now we'll kind of move on from that, I think. I'm hopeful that we can. 3 days left in the week. Tomorrow, we will completely overanalyze what is said at today's weekly media availabilities from both players and Shane Beamer. Then Wednesday, we'll hear from Marcus Satterfield and Clayton White. I don't know if Pete Limbo will be back on the docket or not. I know Kai Kroger, the punter, was one of 8 punters nationally recognized by the Ray Guy Award Foundation or whatever that thing's called as a punter of the week. I don't know why they do 8. Seems ridiculous. But I think he averaged right around 45 yards and 5 punts against Georgia. To me, I think that's what he has been in his career. Pretty good. Did have the fake punt, executed well. Chris, if we don't pull out wins the next 2 games, then we'll use our favorite phrase, wait till next year. Chris. If that happens, now you're just saying one of those 2 games you don't win. Well, I mean, you could read that and say you don't pull out wins the next 2 games. You lose both of those games. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Chris admitted his wife's not happy about the noon kick against South Carolina State. Yeah, I don't think you even think about that, Chris. And that won't be a wait till next year thing. That'll be a the sky has fallen thing. And everything that Shane Beamer had built, decimated. But enjoy talking about it with you guys and hope you can appreciate the perspective of this show where we're not going to sugarcoat things, especially when they look like they looked on Saturday, again, against the defending national champs and the number 1 team in the country, but you just don't get a full pass on that. Can't put it in perspective, but you don't get to excuse it completely. Against Charlotte, I'm trying to see 60 or 70 put up. Marcus Satterfield needs to use these games as a find yourself moment, drain the playbook, and really see what works and translates onto the field, not just paper. Completely agree. I think everybody from the Gamecock perspective, I don't know how you could disagree with that. The more points, the better. Yeah, you're trying to see that many points. I think most Gamecock fans would take the I'll see it when I believe it, or I'll believe it when I see it. A realist Homer sports talk show, Chris says. Roger says, enjoy the show as always. Everybody have a good Tuesday. I will echo those sentiments. Appreciate all the participation as always. Any liking, commenting, retweeting, replying, all very much appreciated on the social media channels as well. They're all out there. The YouTube channel, the subscriptions there, especially appreciated. And if somebody doesn't know about the show, just tell them about it. Tell them to give it a chance. If they don't like it, I get it. No problem. We'll keep doing what we're doing here on Unrestricted Free Agent. Appreciate you guys for weighing in. DC giving the final Spurs up sign and a peace out. That'll do it for the September 20th edition of Tim Hill, Unrestricted Free Agent. Have an excellent Tuesday if you're listening to this on Tuesday. And if not, just have an excellent day.